The sleek black sedan arrived without warning. No roar of engines, no screech of brakes, just a whisper of German engineering gliding to a stop along the manicured suburban street. The silence itself carried menace, for doors opened in perfect synchronization. Won Young emerged first, his black leather jacket catching the afternoon sun, revealing glimpses of ink that crawled up his neck, dragons and characters that spoke of blood oaths and darker loyalties. His crew followed, 3 men in tailored suits that couldn't quite hide the danger beneath. They moved with the practiced efficiency of predators, scanning the quiet neighborhood with eyes that cataloged exits and threats by pure instinct. Curtains twitched in nearby windows. A jogger crossed the opposite sidewalk without breaking stride. Everyone knew you didn't survive in any city without recognizing when power walked your streets. But Won Young's cold assessment stopped dead. There, on the sun-dappled grass, stood a little girl in a flower-print dress. Maureen, no more than 7 years old, with braided hair adorned with colorful beads that clicked softly when she moved. At her feet sat a golden puppy, his fur catching the light like spun honey, tail wagging with the innocent joy that belonged to creatures who hadn't yet learned the world's cruelty. In her small hands, she held a cardboard sign, 2 words written in unsteady crayon, for sale. Behind her, slumped on the grass near the steps of a modest house, sat a woman, exhausted, hollow-eyed, watching with the resigned stillness of someone who had already surrendered. Won Young's crew tensed. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't the plan. But their boss moved forward, his expensive shoes silent on the concrete, until he stood before the child. For a long moment, he simply stared. This man who commanded fear across 3 states, who had built an empire on intimidation and calculated violence. Then he did something no one expected. He knelt. The Korean Mafia boss lowered himself to the pavement, his tattooed hands resting on his knees, until his eyes were level with Maureen's. Up close, he could see the tear tracks on her cheeks, the way her lips trembled as she tried to be brave. "Sir," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of desperation no child should carry. "Will you buy my dog?" She swallowed hard, and the words that followed cut through Won Young's armor, like a blade finding the one unguarded place in his chest. "Mommy hasn't eaten in 2 days." The suburban street seemed to hold its breath. Behind him, Won Young heard the subtle shift of his crew's stance, confusion, perhaps even discomfort. They'd followed him into gunfights and negotiations with cartels. But this was different. This was a little girl selling her only friend for survival. And in that moment, as Won Young stared into Maureen's desperate, hopeful eyes, something long buried began to stir. A memory of another child, another loss, another moment when the world's cruelty had reached down and stolen something irreplaceable. The golden puppy whimpered softly, nuzzling against Maureen's leg, as if sensing that everything was about to change. Won Young's jaw tightened. His fingers curled into fists. Someone's going to pay for this. Before we continue, take a second to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is over there. I love knowing where these stories travel. The concrete was rough beneath Won Young's knee, a small discomfort he hadn't felt in years. Men knelt before him, begging for mercy, pleading for extensions on debts, sometimes simply prostrating themselves in fear. But Won Young himself? He knelt for no one. Not for cops. Not for rival bosses. Not even for the old guard who'd brought him into this life 2 decades ago. Yet here he was, down on one knee like a knight from some fairy tale his sister used to read before. He cut the thought short, his jaw tightening imperceptibly. Maureen stared at him with eyes too old for her face, the cardboard sign trembling in her small hands. The puppy sat obediently beside her, its golden tail sweeping the grass in slow, uncertain arcs. Up close, Won Young could see the details that distance had hidden. The frayed edges of Maureen's dress, clean but worn thin from too many washings. The scuffed white shoes that were half a size too small, her toes pressing against the canvas. The way her braids, though carefully done, were starting to unravel at the ends. The work of mother trying her best with failing strength. "What's your name?" Won Young asked, his voice softer than it had been in months. Behind him, he heard Min Jae shift his weight, surprised. The crew knew their boss's voice in all its registers, Cold command, deadly calm. The particular tone that preceded violence. But this was something else entirely. "Maureen," she whispered. "Maureen Robertson. And your dog." Sunshine. A ghost of a smile flickered across her face, then died. Because he's yellow like the sun. Juan Young's gaze moved past her to the woman on the grass. Sarah Robertson sat with her back against the porch steps, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around herself despite the afternoon warmth. She wore scrubs, a hospital or care facility worker, he guessed, but they hung loose on her frame, as if she'd lost weight rapidly. Her face was gaunt, shadows pooling beneath her eyes and cheekbones. She watched the scene unfolding with a strange, detached expression, as if she were viewing through thick glass, unable to reach through and stop it. A mother who'd been stripped of everything, including the energy to fight. "How much?" Juan Young asked, turning back to Maureen. She looked down at the puppy, then back up at him, her eyes filling. "I don't know. However much you think is fair, sir. We need enough for food, and maybe the electricity. They turned it off yesterday." She said it matter-of-factly, the way children do when trauma becomes routine. Juan Young had heard that tone before, in other lives, other places, in his own voice, once, a lifetime ago. Behind him, Jae-sung cleared his throat softly, the signal they used when situations were getting complicated, when it was time to move on. They had business across town, a meeting with the Bratva representative that couldn't be delayed, money to collect, territory to discuss, the grinding machinery of their empire that never stopped turning. Juan Young ignored him. "Tell me what happened," he said to Maureen, though his eyes drifted again to Sarah, reading the story in her defeated posture. "Why are you selling Sunshine?" Maureen's lower lip quivered. She was trying so hard to be brave, to be grown up, but she was still just a little girl clutching a cardboard sign and hoping a stranger would save her. "We had a house," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "A nice man. Mama said he wasn't nice, but he smiled a lot. He came and said we had to leave. Mr. Clayton. He said the mortgage was due and Mama was late, but Mama showed him she paid. She had the receipts and everything, but he said it didn't matter because of some paper she signed." Her words tumbled out faster now, the dam breaking. "And then men came with a truck and took all our stuff. Mama cried. I'd never seen Mama cry before. We've been staying with Mama's friend, Miss Jenkins, but she says we can't stay much longer because she only has one bedroom, and..." Maureen hiccuped, tears now streaming freely down her face. "And Mama won't eat. She gives me her food and says she already ate, but I know she didn't. I know she's hungry. So I thought if I sold Sunshine..." She broke down completely then, dropping to her knees and wrapping her arms around the puppy, burying her face in its golden fur. "But I love him so much. I don't want to lose him too. I don't want to lose anything else." Juan Young remained motionless, his expression carved from stone, but something was happening behind his eyes, a calculation that had nothing to do with profit margins or territorial advantages. This was a different kind of math, one he hadn't performed in years. Sarah finally moved, pushing herself up from the steps with visible effort. "Maureen, baby, come here. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But Juan Young raised one hand, not threatening, just a gesture that commanded attention. Sarah froze. He reached into his jacket, and every muscle in his crew tensed until they saw what he withdrew, a leather wallet, thick with bills. Juan Young pulled out a crisp $100 bill, holding it where Maureen could see. Her eyes widened, but he didn't hand it over yet. "This Mr. Clayton," he said quietly. "Tell me exactly what he did." Maureen wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing tears across her cheek. "He came to our house 3 times. The first time, he was smiling. He told Mama he was there to help, that he could refinance our loan and make the payment smaller." Sarah's voice cracked from the porch steps. "I was behind. Just 2 months. I'd picked up extra shifts, had the money almost ready, but he said he had a better solution." Juan Young's eyes never left Maureen, but he was listening to every word Sarah spoke. "Mama signed papers," Maureen continued, her small voice steadying as she focused on the story. "Lots of papers. Mr. Clayton said it would fix everything. But then he came back and said we owed more money than before. Way more. He said Mama agreed to it. But Mama said she didn't understand what the papers meant. She asked him to explain, but he just smiled and said, business is business. How much more? Wan Young asked. $50,000, Sarah whispered. The original mortgage was $32,000. I paid off almost half. He restructured it, added fees, penalties for early termination of the original loan, processing costs. All of it buried in legal language I didn't understand. By the time I realized what happened, the house was worth less than what I suddenly owed. Wan Young's expression didn't change, but his crew knew that stillness. It was a calm before devastation. I tried to fight it, Sarah continued, her voice breaking. I went to legal aid. They said it would take months, maybe years, and I'd need money for a lawyer. Money I didn't have. Clayton knew that. He counted on it. 3 weeks later, he filed for foreclosure. Said I defaulted on the new terms. The judge, her voice turned bitter. The judge barely looked at my evidence. 10 minutes. That's all my home was worth. 10 minutes in the courtroom. And then the men came. Maureen said softly, with a big truck. They took Mama's bed and the couch Grandma gave us and all our dishes. Mr. Clayton was there, watching. He told Mama she should have read the fine print. I begged him. Sarah's voice was raw. I got down on my knees and begged. I told him I had a daughter. I told him I'd pay anything, work any hours. He looked at me like I was nothing, like we were nothing. Just another house, another profit margin. Maureen's hand tightened on Sunshine's collar. I grabbed Sunshine and ran before they could take him too. I hid in Miss Jenkins's car until they left. He's all I have left from our real home. Her voice broke again. He's all I have. Wan Young stood slowly, his knee protesting the extended crouch. He looked down at the little girl and her golden puppy, then at the broken mother on the steps. What's Clayton's full name? Marcus Clayton, Sarah said, the name leaving her mouth like poison. Clayton Properties and Investments. He has an office downtown in the financial district. Big glass building with his name on it. Wan Young nodded once, filing the information away with the precision of a man who'd built an empire on remembering names, faces, and debts. He peeled off $500 bills from his wallet, crisp and sequential, and held them out to Maureen. The little girl stared at the money, her eyes going wide. She'd probably never seen that much cash in her entire life. Her small hand reached out, trembling, fingers stretching toward the bills. But then she stopped, looking down at Sunshine with an expression that shattered something in Wan Young's chest, a thing he thought long dead and calcified. Is that enough? She asked, her voice breaking. For Sunshine? No, Wan Young said flatly. Maureen's face crumpled, fresh tears spilling over. She clutched the puppy tighter, pressing her face against his soft fur. Please, sir, please. I'll take good care of him until you come back for him. I promise I'll feed him and walk him and... You misunderstand, Wan Young interrupted, his voice gentler than his crew had heard in years. This isn't enough because you're not selling him. The little girl looked up, confusion cutting through her tears. But Mama needs to eat. And Miss Jenkins said, we only have 3 more days and then... Keep the dog, Wan Young said, pressing the bills into her hand and closing her fingers around them. And your mother will eat tonight. For a moment, no one moved. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the scene. The kneeling Mafia boss, the sobbing child, the golden puppy, the broken mother. It looked like a photograph, a snapshot of something impossible. Then Sarah was moving, stumbling forward off the porch steps. No, we can't. I can't take your money. I don't even know you. We can't. You can, Wan Young said, his tone brooking no argument. You will. But why? Sarah's voice cracked with exhaustion and confusion and something like fear, not of him, but hope itself, of letting herself believe in kindness from a stranger. Why would you help us? Wan Young didn't answer immediately. He stood there, the leather of his jacket creaking softly, his tattooed hands hanging at his sides. Behind him, his crew waited in silence, none of them daring to speak, to break whatever strange spell had fallen over their boss. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, his eyes focused on something beyond the suburban street, beyond the present moment entirely. "I had a sister once." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread outward into silence. Jiyoung. She was 6 years younger than me. My parents worked 2 jobs each, sometimes 3. We grew up in a one-room apartment in Seoul, then later in Queens after we immigrated. Jiyoung had a stuffed rabbit, ratty thing, one ear torn half off, stuffing coming out. She'd had it since she was a baby. Loved it more than anything. Maureen had stopped crying, listening with the peculiar attention children give to stories told by adults who rarely speak of themselves. When I was 17, my father borrowed money from the wrong people, tried to start a restaurant, give our family something better. The business failed. The debt didn't. Won Young's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. They came to collect, took everything. Furniture, my mother's jewelry, every piece of clothing except what we wore. And Ji Young's rabbit. He paused, and his crew saw something they'd never witnessed before. Their boss's hand curling into a fist so tight his knuckles went white. She ran after them, crying, begging, just like he stopped himself, looking down at Maureen. She was 8 years old, chasing after men who didn't care, men who saw her as nothing, as less than nothing, an obstacle to profit. Sarah had her hand over her mouth, tears streaming silently down her face. My father tried to stop them from taking it. They beat him in front of us, broke his arm, left him bleeding on the sidewalk while they loaded their truck. Ji Young stood there holding my hand, watching the only thing she loved disappear. She didn't cry anymore after that day. She just stopped talking much, stopped smiling. That light in her eyes, the thing that makes children themselves, it went out. Won Young looked at Maureen again, really looked at her, seeing in her face the ghost of his sister, the echo of every child the world had tried to break. She got sick 2 years later. Pneumonia. We couldn't afford treatment, not the kind she needed. My parents had been trying to pay off that debt, penny by penny, and there was nothing left. I was 19, working whatever jobs I could find, but it wasn't enough. It's never enough when you're poor, when you're powerless. His voice went cold, flat. She died in a county hospital, asking for her rabbit. The silence that followed was absolute. I swore that day I'd never be powerless again, Won Young continued. Never let anyone take what mattered from me or mine. I built an empire on that promise, on making sure I had enough money, enough fear, enough control, that no one could ever do to me what those men did to my family. He looked down at the money in Maureen's hand, then at the puppy press against her side. "You're not selling this dog," he said, his voice returning to its usual command. "You're not losing one more thing. Not today." He reached into his wallet again and pulled out the rest, easily $2,000 in cash, and handed it to Sarah, who took it with shaking hands, too shocked to protest. "Find a place to stay. Feed your daughter. Feed yourself." He turned to leave, his crew falling into formation behind him like a well-oiled machine. "Wait!" Sarah called out, her voice stronger now. "Please, what's your name? I need to know who I owe. I'll pay you back, I swear. Every dollar. Just give me time." And Won Young looked back over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "You owe me nothing," he said quietly. "But Marcus Clayton, he owes you everything." He walked toward the sedan, his crew following, but Maureen's voice stopped him one last time. "Thank you, sir. Thank you." He paused with his hand on the car door, not turning back. "Take care, sunshine." As the sedan pulled away from the curb in the same whisper-quiet way it had arrived, Min Jae finally spoke from the driver's seat. "Boss, the Bratva meeting." "Reschedule it," Won Young said, pulling out his phone. "And what do I tell them we're doing instead?" Won Young's eyes were hard as obsidian, cold as a winter sea. "Research." The sedan glided through traffic with the practiced ease of men who knew every shortcut, every blind spot where cameras didn't reach, every route that kept them invisible when they needed to be. But today, invisibility wasn't the goal. Won Young sat in the back seat, his phone pressed to his ear, issuing commands in Korean that flowed like water, smooth, unstoppable, inevitable. His crew had learned long ago to read the nuances in their boss's voice, to distinguish between the casual orders of daily business and the razor-edge tone that meant someone had made a fatal error in judgment. This was the latter. "I won everything," Won Young said into the phone, his English crisp and unaccented when he switched languages mid-conversation. Financial records, property holdings, business partnerships, political donations. Who he owes, who owes him. His wife's name, his children's schools, where he eats lunch, who he's fucking on the side, everything. On the other end, Danny Cho, their information specialist, a former NSA contractor who'd found more lucrative employment in the private sector, didn't ask questions. He never did. Questions implied doubt, and doubting Won Young's orders was a luxury no one in the organization could afford. "Timeline?" Danny asked. 2 hours. A pause. "Boss, that's—" 2 hours, Won Young repeated, and the line went dead. Min Jae glanced in the rear-view mirror, catching his boss's eye. "We're really doing this? For a woman and kid we just met? You have a problem with that?" The question was casual, almost gentle, which made it infinitely more dangerous. "No, boss. Just making sure I understand the play." Jae-sung shifted in the passenger seat, his broad shoulders testing the limits of his tailored suit. "Clayton's connected. I've heard the name before. He does business with the Antonelli family. Legitimate construction contracts. Property development. If we move on him, we might be stepping on toes." "Then we'll step carefully," Won Young said. "This isn't a territorial dispute. This is justice." Hyun-woo, the youngest of the crew at 26, spoke up from beside Won Young. "Justice? Boss, we're not exactly the police." Won Young turned to look at him, and Hyun-woo immediately regretted speaking. Those eyes, cold, calculating, ancient with experiences no 38-year-old should carry, pinned him in place. "No," Won Young agreed. "We're not the police. The police would take months, maybe years. They'd need evidence that would hold up in court, lawyers, judges who aren't in someone's pocket. That little girl would be in foster care by the time they finish investigating. Her mother would be homeless, broken, probably dead." He leaned forward slightly. "We're not the police because the police can't do what needs to be done. But we can. Without violence?" Min Jae asked carefully. "Because Clayton's not going to just roll over because we ask nicely. There are forms of violence that don't leave bruises," Won Young said, settling back into his seat. "We're going to destroy him without laying a finger on him. Clean. Surgical. The kind of operation that leaves no evidence, no witnesses, nothing that can blow back on us." He pulled out his phone again, scrolling through contacts with the practiced ease of a man who had the entire city's underworld at his fingertips. "Hyun-woo, call Attorney Park. Tell him I need a consultation on predatory lending laws and fraudulent foreclosure practices. Today, this afternoon." Attorney Park? The one who used to work for the... Yes, the one who knows every loophole in real estate law because he spent 15 years creating them for banks. Won Young's smile was thin and sharp as a blade. Now he works for us, and he's going to tell us exactly how Clayton operates and where he's vulnerable. His phone buzzed. A text from Danny, starting the dig. This guy leaves digital footprints like he wants to be caught. Won Young showed the message to Min Jae. "Take us to the restaurant. We'll set up there." The restaurant was a legitimate front, a high-end Korean barbecue place in Koreatown that served the best galbi in the city and also functioned as the nerve center of Won Young's operations. The back room, soundproofed and swept daily for bugs, had seen more significant decisions than most corporate boardrooms. 20 minutes later, they were seated around a table that had been cleared of everything except laptops, tablets, and phones. Danny Cho arrived with a messenger bag full of equipment, his fingers already flying across a keyboard before he'd fully sat down. "Marcus Clayton." Danny began without preamble, pulling up files on a large screen mounted on the wall. 52 years old. Started Clayton Properties 15 years ago with family money. His father-in-laws actually made his fortune buying distressed properties during the 2008 crash, restructuring mortgages with predatory terms, then foreclosing when people couldn't pay. Photos appeared on the screen. Clayton at charity galas, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, political fundraisers. He was handsome in the way wealthy men often are, well-groomed, expensively dressed, with a kind of smile that never reached the eyes. He's been sued 17 times, Danny continued. Settled out of court in every case with NDAs attached. The settlements are substantial enough to suggest he knew he'd lose if it went to trial. Smart, Jae-sung muttered. Pay them off, silence them, move on. Not smart enough, Won-young said. What else? He's got 3 LLCs that operate independently, but funnel money back to a parent company he controls. Classic shell game to protect assets and obscure ownership. His biggest vulnerability. Danny pulled up a spreadsheet covered in red numbers. Is leverage. He's overextended. Took out massive loans to finance new developments, betting on the market staying hot. If property values drop, or if his creditors suddenly demand payment, his whole empire collapses like a house of cards. Won-young leaned forward, studying the numbers with the intensity of a general surveying a battlefield. Who holds his paper? Mix of banks and private lenders. The biggest note, $12 million, is held by Cascade Capital Group. A slow smile spread across Won-young's face. And who owns 40% of Cascade Capital? Danny's fingers flew across the keyboard, following the money trail through layers of corporate ownership. Then he stopped, looking up at his boss with something like awe. The Chong Investment Fund, which is controlled by my uncle, Won-young finished, Sun Jean Chong, who owes me a favor from that situation in Vancouver last year. Min Jae laughed, a short bark of sound. You're recalling his loan. Not immediately, Won-young said, his mind already 3 moves ahead. That would be too obvious, too traceable. No, we're going to do something much more elegant. We're going to make Clayton believe he's about to lose everything, and then we're going to offer him a way out, one that requires him to undo every bit of damage he did to Sarah Robertson. Attorney Park arrived 30 minutes later. A thin man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen the worst of human nature and learned to profit from it. He listened to Won-young's summary of the situation, occasionally nodding, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. The foreclosure was legal, Park said finally. Unethical, predatory, morally bankrupt, but legal. The contracts Clayton used are standard in the industry, deliberately complex, designed to confuse borrowers. Courts rarely overturn them. I don't need it overturned in court, Won-young said. I need leverage. I need something that makes him voluntarily reverse it. Park smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Then we don't attack the foreclosure. We attack everything else. The Clayton Properties building rose 32 stories into the downtown skyline, all steel and glass and architectural arrogance. The ground floor featured a lobby that looked more like a 5-star hotel than an office building. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine, abstract sculptures that probably cost more than Sarah Robertson's stolen house, and a waterfall feature that cascaded down one entire wall, with the kind of ostentatious wealth that whisper, I have so much money I can afford to waste it on aesthetics. Won-young stepped through the revolving doors at precisely 2:15 in the afternoon, his crew flanking him in a formation that looked casual but was anything but. They'd changed clothes. Gone were the obvious markers of street power, replaced with Italian suits that cost $5,000 each. They looked like investors, developers, the kind of men who belonged in buildings like this. But anyone with real instincts could see the danger underneath the tailoring. The lobby was designed to intimidate, to make visitors feel small and insignificant. The ceiling soared 40 feet overhead, and every surface reflected light in ways that made it hard to judge distances or find exits quickly. Security cameras were mounted in plain sight at every angle, a message that said we're watching, we're always watching. A security desk sat to the left, manned by 2 guards in uniforms that looked almost police official, complete with badges and earpieces. And directly ahead, behind a reception desk that looked carved from a single piece of black granite, sat a woman whose entire existence was dedicated to being a human wall between Marcus Clayton and the people he destroyed. She was in her mid-40s, blonde hair pulled back, so tightly it looked painful, wearing a designer suit and an expression that could freeze water. Her nameplate read Victoria Sutherland, executive assistant. She looked up as Won Young approached, and her eyes did a quick, practice assessment. Expensive suit, confident walk, the bearing of money and power. But also, the tattoos creeping up from his collar, the hardness in his eyes, the three men behind him who moved like predators in a world of prey. Her smile was professional and completely false. "Good afternoon. Do you have an appointment?" "No," Won Young said simply, stopping in front of her desk with the casual ease of a man who'd never been denied entry anywhere. Victoria's smile never wavered, but her fingers moved subtly toward her phone. "I'm afraid Mr. Clayton's schedule is completely full today. If you'd like to leave your name and contact information, I'd be happy to have someone from our office reach out to schedule a consultation. Our next available slot is," she glanced at her computer screen, "3 weeks from Tuesday." "That won't work," Won Young said, his tone conversational. "I need to see him today. Now, actually, as I said, Mr. Clayton is." "I heard what you said." Won Young placed both hands on her desk, leaning forward just enough to invade her carefully constructed professional space. "Now hear what I'm saying. You're going to call up to his office, and you're going to tell him that someone is here about the Robertson property, and then he's going to see me." Victoria's professionalism cracked slightly, a flicker of something, uncertainty, perhaps recognition of the name, crossing her face. But she recovered quickly, her spine straightening, her hand now openly reaching for the phone. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. If you refuse, I'll call security." "You mean those two?" Hyun-woo gestured toward the security desk without turning around. "They're already watching. Have been since we walked in. Tell me, Victoria." Won Young read her nameplate deliberately, making it clear he was filing the name away. "How much does Clayton pay you to be his gatekeeper? To turn away the people whose lives he's ruined? The families he's destroyed? I don't know what you're talking about." But her hand had frozen on the phone, not quite lifting it. "Sarah Robertson," Won Young said, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous. "Single mother, healthcare worker. He restructured her mortgage, buried her in fees she didn't understand, then foreclosed when she couldn't pay the inflated amount. Does that sound familiar? Or are there so many victims you can't keep track?" Victoria's jaw tightened. "Mr. Clayton is a businessman. All of his transactions are legal and properly documented. If Mrs. Robertson has a complaint, she's welcome to consult an attorney." "With what money?" Jae-sung spoke up from behind, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "He took her house, took everything she had. Where exactly should she get money for an attorney?" The security guards had stood up from their desk, hands moving to their belts where radios and other equipment hung. The lobby's ambient music, some bland instrumental version of a pop song, seemed to grow louder in the tension. Victoria picked up her phone, but before she could dial, Won Young spoke again. "You should know something about the man you work for," he said, his tone conversational again, almost friendly. "In the past 5 years, Clayton Properties has foreclosed on 347 homes. That's 347 families displaced. 42 of those foreclosures involve single mothers. 7 involve families with disabled children. 12 led to bankruptcies. 3, his voice went cold as winter, led to suicide." Victoria's face had gone pale, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "Those are just numbers. You can't prove." "I can prove all of it," Won Young interrupted. "I have documentation, financial records, emails, recorded phone calls where your boss laughs about squeezing blood from stones. Would you like to hear them? Or should I just release them to the media?" The bluff was calculated, delivered with such casual certainty that Victoria couldn't tell if he was lying or not. In truth, Danny was still compiling some of the evidence, but Won Young had learned long ago that confidence so lies better than any forged document. "You're threatening me," Victoria said, but her voice had lost its edge. "No," Won Young corrected. I'm explaining reality. Your boss has made enemies. Powerful ones. The kind who don't go away, who don't give up, who don't accept no as an answer. He straightened, adjusting his jacket with deliberate care. Now! You can call security. They can try to remove us. And then tomorrow, every major news outlet in the city will receive a detailed file on Marcus Clayton's business practices. Or, he paused, letting the word hang in the air. Or, Victoria prompted, despite herself. Or you pick up that phone, call your boss, and tell him someone is here about the Robertson case. Tell him this person has information he very much wants to keep private. Tell him. Wan Young's smile was sharp and cold, that if he doesn't see me in the next 5 minutes, his whole glass castle comes crashing down. Victoria stared at him for a long moment, her hand still hovering over the phone. Behind Wan Young, the security guards had moved closer, waiting for her signal. The waterfall continued its endless cascade, a sound like money flowing away into nothing. Then Victoria lifted the phone and pressed a button. Mr. Clayton? Her voice was steady, professional. I have a situation in the lobby. Someone regarding the Robertson property. He says it's urgent. A pause. Yes, sir. I understand. I'll send them up. She hung up and looked at Wan Young with an expression that mixed fear, respect, and something like relief. 30th floor. Corner office. He'll see you now. The elevator was one of those glass-walled affairs that ran up the outside of the building, offering a view of the city spreading out below like a circuit board of lights and steel. Wan Young watched the ground recede with the detached interest of a man who'd long ago stopped being impressed by displays of wealth. His crew stood behind him in silence, each man processing the coming confrontation in his own way. Min Jae broke the quiet as they passed the 20th floor. He knows we're coming now. He'll have called his lawyers, maybe his security people. Could be walking into a trap. It's not a trap, Wan Young said, watching their reflection ghost across the glass. It's a negotiation. He just doesn't know the terms yet. The elevator chimed softly at the 30th floor, and the door slid open onto a reception area that made the lobby look modest by comparison. Here, the wealth was quieter, more refined, leather furniture that probably cost more than a car, original artwork on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the entire city into Clayton's personal vista. Another assistant sat at another desk, this one younger, more nervous. She'd clearly been warned they were coming. Mr. Clayton is expecting you, she said, gesturing toward a set of double doors made of dark wood with brass handles. Just you, sir. Your associates will need to wait here. Wan Young nodded once to his crew. Jisung looked like he wanted to argue, but a glance from his boss settled it. They took positions around the reception area, casually occupying the space in a way that made the young assistant very uncomfortable. The doors opened smoothly, and Wan Young stepped into Marcus Clayton's office alone. The room was exactly what he'd expected, a monument to ego and acquisition. The desk was massive, positioned to face the windows, so that anyone sitting across from Clayton would have the sun in their eyes, while Clayton himself was backlit like some corporate deity. The walls were lined with photos of Clayton shaking hands with politicians, cutting ribbons, accepting awards. A credenza displayed crystal decanters of expensive liquor alongside framed magazine covers featuring his face. Real estate visionary, the man who rebuilt downtown. Success through strategic acquisition. Marcus Clayton stood by the windows, hands in the pockets of his $1,000 slacks, looking out over his kingdom. He didn't turn when Wan Young entered, a power move so obvious it was almost quaint. I know who you are, Clayton said, his voice smooth and cultured, the accent of old money in East Coast boarding schools. Wan Young, Korean organized crime. You run drugs, guns, and protection rackets through half the city. You're a criminal. Yes. Wan Young agreed simply, closing the doors behind him. Clayton turned then, and Wan Young got his first good look at the man who destroyed Sarah Robertson's life. He was handsome in a bland, generic way. The kind of face that could sell luxury sedans or financial services, trustworthy and completely forgettable. His hair was going silver at the temples, in that distinguished way wealthy men's hair always seemed to. His suit probably cost what most people earned in a month. So we understand each other, Clayton continued, moving behind his desk, but not sitting, maintaining the height advantage. You're here to intimidate me, maybe threaten me. Perhaps you think that because I took something from someone you decided to protect, you can walk in here and... What exactly? Rough me up? Burn down my building? Kill me? He smiled, and it was a smile of a man who believed himself untouchable. I have lawyers, security, police commissioners in my pocket. Whatever you think you can do to me, I promise you, the consequences will be severe. Wan Yung crossed the office slowly, his footsteps silent on the plush carpet. He didn't respond to any of Clayton's posturing, didn't acknowledge the threats or the bravado. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket, causing Clayton to tense visibly, and withdrew a single photograph, printed on regular copy paper. He placed it on Clayton's desk without a word. Clayton looked down at the image. It was a scene from this afternoon. Maureen in her flower print dress, holding her for sale sign, tears streaming down her face, sunshine at her feet. Sarah Robertson in the background, slumped and defeated, and Wan Yung himself, kneeling on the pavement, his tattooed hands visible, his face captured in profile as he looked at the crying child. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. I don't, Clayton began, but Wan Yung raised one hand, and the gesture was so commanding that Clayton actually stopped speaking. You're going to listen now, Wan Yung said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. You're not going to justify, explain, or defend. You're going to listen. He moved around the desk, invading Clayton's space the same way he'd invaded Victoria's. But this time there was nowhere for Clayton to retreat. The windows were at his back, Wan Yung in front of him, and a photograph between them like evidence at a trial. That little girl's name is Maureen Robertson, Wan Yung said. She's 7 years old. Today, she tried to sell her dog, the last thing she owned that brought her joy, so her mother could eat. Her mother, Sarah, who works 60-hour weeks as a healthcare aide, who's been sleeping in a friend's living room, who hasn't had electricity for 3 days. Look, if this is about the Robertson foreclosure, Clayton tried again, his voice taking on that reasonable, businesslike tone that had probably worked on judges and juries. Everything was done legally. She signed the contracts. She agreed to the terms. If she didn't understand them, she should have hired an attorney to review. She couldn't afford an attorney, Wan Yung interrupted, his voice still quiet, still controlled. You knew that. You counted on it. Clayton's jaw tightened, and for the first time, Wan Yung saw a flash of the real man beneath the polished exterior. Something cold and calculating and utterly devoid of empathy. It's business, Clayton said flatly. Nothing personal. The market is competitive. If I don't take advantage of opportunities, someone else will. That's how capitalism works. That's how I built all this. He gestured at the office, the view, the empire, by being smarter, faster, more willing to do what's necessary. By destroying families, Wan Yung said. By providing a service, restructuring debt, offering solutions to people who mismanage their finances. By burying them in fees they couldn't understand and terms designed to guarantee default. Clayton's expression hardened. Are you here to lecture me on ethics? You? A gangster? A criminal? You probably killed people, destroyed lives, and you're going to stand in my office and judge me? Wan Yung picked up the photograph, holding it where Clayton couldn't avoid seeing it. I know what I am, he said softly. I've never pretended otherwise. I've hurt people, yes, killed them, even, but I've never hidden behind words like business or legal or terms and conditions. I've never convinced myself that paperwork and contracts made cruelty somehow acceptable. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You're worse than me, Mr. Clayton, because at least I know I'm a monster. Clayton's face had gone red, anger finally breaking through his careful composure. Get out. Get out of my office before I have security throw you out and call the police. No, Wan Yung said simply. No, we're not done yet. Wan Yung set the photograph back on the desk, tapping it once with his finger, because now we're going to discuss how you're going to fix what you broke. Clayton laughed, but it was a brittle sound, the laugh of a man trying to convince himself he still held the upper hand. Fix it? I'm not fixing anything. You have no leverage here. No authority. You're a thug in an expensive suit who thinks he can walk into my office and... Cascade Capital Group, Wan Yung said, and Clayton's laugh died in his throat. The silence that followed was profound. Outside the windows, the city continued its endless hum. But inside the office, the air seemed to thicken, to press down with the weight of revealed secrets. What? Clayton's voice was carefully controlled, but Wan Yung heard the crack beneath it. Your $12 million loan with Cascade Capital, due for refinancing in 45 days. The interest rate jumps from 4.2% to 8.7% if you can't secure better terms. And securing better terms requires demonstrating liquidity and creditworthiness. Wan Yung pulled out his phone, scrolling through information Danny had compiled. Unfortunately, your current debt-to-asset ratio is concerning. You're leveraged at nearly 90% on 3 major development projects that haven't broken ground yet. Projects that require permits, currently tied up in city council review. Clayton had gone very still, the kind of stillness prey animals adopt when a predator draws near. City Councilman David Park sits on the Planning Commission. Wan Yung continued, his tone conversational, almost friendly. His vote is crucial for your Riverside development. That's $40 million in projected revenue over the next 5 years. Without that permit, you can't get construction financing. Without construction financing, you default on your options contracts. And if you default on those contracts, how do you know about Riverside? Clayton's voice was hoarse. That project isn't public yet. I know everything about you, Mr. Clayton. I know your wife Eleanor is filing for divorce. She found out about your affair with your commercial property manager, Jennifer Torres. I know the prenup you signed gives her 60% of marital assets, which includes your stake in Clayton Properties. I know your son Daniel is in rehab for the 3rd time, and you're covering the costs in cash, so it doesn't appear on insurance records. I know. Stop. Clayton moved behind his desk like it could protect him, his hands gripping the edge. What do you want? I want you to understand your situation, Wan Yung said, pocketing his phone. You're not untouchable. You're not protected. You're a house of cards in a windstorm, and I'm about to blow. He moved to the window, looking out at the city the same way Clayton had when he'd entered. The reversal of positions was deliberate, symbolic. Now Clayton was the one squinting against the light, trying to see clearly. Councilman Park is my friend, Wan Yung said. Well, not friend exactly. But he's a man who understands the value of certain relationships. His daughter attends a very expensive private school. Harvard next year. If she gets in, I've made a generous donation to Harvard's endowment fund in her name. The kind of donation that gets noticed by admissions committees. Clayton's face had gone pale. You're bribing a city councilman through his daughter's college fund? I'm supporting education, Wan Yung corrected mildly. What the councilman chooses to do with his gratitude is entirely his decision. Free will and all that. But I suspect when your Riverside permit comes up for vote, he'll remember who helped secure his daughter's future. That's extortion. No, that's networking. Extortion would be if I threatened to reveal that Councilman Park accepted campaign contributions from your shell companies in exchange for favorable zoning decisions, which I could do, but that seems unnecessarily messy. Wan Yung turned from the window, his expression cold and precise. Cascade Capital is owned 40% by Chong Investment Fund. My uncle sits on the board. He's been concerned about their exposure to risky real estate ventures. One phone call from me, and your loan gets called in early. 45 days becomes 45 hours. They can't do that legally. Read your loan documents, Mr. Clayton. Section 12, paragraph 4. Lender reserves the right to accelerate payment schedule if borrower's financial position materially changes. And your financial position is about to change dramatically. Wan Yung pulled out his phone again, showing Clayton a series of emails on the screen. These are from the building inspector assigned to your Harbor Point project. 17 code violations that somehow never made it into official reports. Violations that would shut down construction for months while you remediate. Violations that would void your completion timeline with your investors. How did you get those? Clayton's voice was barely a whisper. The inspector has a gambling problem. owes money to people who work for people who work for me. He was very cooperative. Wan Yung swiped to another screen. This is your bank statement from Monarch Financial. The offshore account you think no one knows about. $3.2 million in undeclared income. The IRS will be very interested in this, don't you think? Clayton sank into his chair, his carefully constructed armor cracking piece by piece. What do you want? He asked again, but this time there was no defiance in the question, only defeat. Wan Yung walked back to the desk, picking up the photograph of Maureen. I want you to understand something about power, Mr. Clayton. Real power isn't about money or lawyers or connections. It's about being willing to do what others won't. You built your empire on the backs of people who couldn't fight back. Single mothers, elderly people, immigrants who didn't understand the system. You chose them specifically because they were vulnerable. He set the photo down, tapping Maureen's face with one finger. But this little girl? She's not alone anymore. She has me, and I'm not vulnerable. I'm not powerless. I'm the monster you spent your whole life pretending didn't exist. The consequence you thought you'd escaped by hiding behind legality and paperwork. Please, Clayton said, and the word came out broken. Please, what do you want me to do? Sarah Robertson's house. You're going to return it. Not sell it back. Not offer a payment plan. Return it. Full ownership, clear title, all liens removed. You'll cover all her moving costs, repair any damage, and forgive every dollar she ever paid you. The original mortgage she had before you restructured it, paid in full. She owns her home outright. That's nearly $200,000. Pocket change to a man of your means, Wan Yung said coldly. Or it was, anyway, consider it an investment in your survival. Clayton's hands were shaking. And if I do this, you'll leave me alone. If you do this, I'll consider not destroying you today. Wan Yung leaned across the desk, his voice dropping to something deadly quiet. But understand, Mr. Clayton, I'm watching now. Every foreclosure, every restructured loan, every family you even think about crushing. I'll know, and the next time won't be a warning. This is extortion, blackmail. Yes, Wan Yung agreed simply. It is, and you're going to accept it, because the alternative is watching everything you built crumble into dust. He straightened, adjusting his jacket. You have 24 hours to begin the paperwork. I want Sarah Robertson in her home by the end of the week. I want a public statement from Clayton Properties about correcting an unfortunate administrative error. I want her compensated for her suffering. $50,000 should suffice. $50,000 for her pain and suffering, for her daughter's trauma, for the indignity of being made homeless by a man who has 4 houses and a vacation home in the Hamptons. Wan Yung's voice could have frozen blood. You'll smile while you write the check. You'll apologize publicly. And you'll mean it, or at least you'll sound like you mean it. He walked to the door, then paused, looking back at Clayton slumped in his expensive chair, surrounded by all his symbols of success that suddenly seemed as insubstantial as smoke. One more thing, Wan Yung said. That photograph? I have copies. Hundreds of them. If anything happens to me, if I'm arrested or if I disappear, if I so much as stub my toe mysteriously, those copies go to every media outlet in the country, along with complete documentation of everything you've done. Every illegal deal, every bribe, every family you've destroyed. You'll be famous, Mr. Clayton, just not the way you like. How do I know you'll keep your word? Clayton asked desperately. How do I know you won't destroy me anyway? Wan Yung smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see. You don't. That's what it feels like to be powerless. Welcome to the world the rest of us live in. The elevator descent felt longer than the ascent, though the numbers counted down at the same mechanical pace. Wan Yung's crew fell into formation around him without being asked, reading his mood in the set of his shoulders, the slight tension in his jaw that meant the meeting had gone exactly as planned. Well, Min Jae asked as they crossed the marble lobby, past Victoria, who wouldn't meet their eyes, past the security guards who suddenly found their phones very interesting. It's done, Wan Yung said simply. They didn't speak again until they were in the sedan, pulling into traffic, the glass tower receding in the rear-view mirror. Jae Sung turned in his seat, studying his boss's face. He agreed? Just like that. He agreed. Won Young confirmed, pulling out his phone. Though just like that doesn't quite capture the process. Danny, you there? The phone clicked to speaker. Right here, boss. How'd it go? He'll comply. But I want eyes on him anyway. Monitor his communications, his movements, his bank accounts. If he tries to run or hide assets, I want to know before he's finished typing the wire transfer. Already on it. I got alerts set up on all his accounts and a keystroke logger on his office computer. Don't ask how. If he even thinks about screwing us, we'll know. Good. Won Young ended the call and leaned back against a leather seat, closing his eyes. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind a familiar exhaustion that always followed these confrontations. People thought violence was tiring, but the careful manipulation, the strategic revelations, the psychological warfare, this drained something deeper. Boss, Hyun-woo ventured carefully. What you did up there, that was impressive. But what if he doesn't follow through? What if he calls our bluff? Won Young opened his eyes, turned to look at his youngest crew member. It wasn't a bluff. Every piece of information I gave him was real. Every threat, every connection, every vulnerable point, all of it verified and ready to execute. That's the difference between intimidation and destruction. Intimidation is theater. Destruction is homework. The drive back to the restaurant took 40 minutes in traffic. By the time they arrived, Attorney Park was waiting in the back room, paper spread across the table like a general's battle plans. It's already started, Park said without preamble, gesturing to his laptop screen. Clayton's attorney called mine 20 minutes ago. They want to negotiate terms. No negotiation, Won Young said flatly. Complete restitution or complete destruction. Those are his options. They're asking for time. 30 days to arrange. 72 hours. The house, the title, the compensation check. Tell them if they need more time than that. It's because they're trying to hide assets, and we'll respond accordingly. Park nodded, making notes. They'll push back. Let them, then remind them about the building inspector's report, or the offshore accounts, or the city councilman, whatever gets them moving fastest. For the next 6 hours, Won Young's organization operated with the precision of a military campaign. Attorney Park handled the legal warfare, firing off emails and making calls that left Clayton's lawyers scrambling. Danny monitored Clayton's digital footprint, tracking every email, every phone call, every panic consultation with his accountants. Won Young himself made 3 calls, one to his uncle at Chong Investment Fund, one to Councilman Park, and one to a journalist at the city's largest newspaper, planting seeds for a story he might or might not need to harvest. By 8 o'clock that evening, Min Jae brought dinner, Korean fried chicken and beer, and they ate while watching Clayton's empire begin its carefully controlled collapse. He's moving money, Danny reported through a mouthful of chicken, liquidating stocks, calling in small debts. He's gathering the cash for the Robertson payout. What about the house paperwork? Won Young asked. His lawyer filed emergency motions this afternoon, reversing the foreclosure, citing administrative errors in loan processing. The judge who rubber-stamped the original foreclosure suddenly found time in his schedule to review the reversal. Funny how that works. Jae-sung laughed darkly. That judge probably got a call from someone who got a call from someone. The system protecting itself. The system protecting us, Won Young corrected. This time, anyway. At 9:30, Attorney Park's phone rang. He listened for 3 minutes without speaking, his expression carefully neutral, then ended the call. They're complying. Full restitution package will be ready by tomorrow afternoon. House title, clear and free. $50,000 check. Public statement drafted and ready for release. They're asking, he paused, checking his notes. They're asking if it satisfies your client's demands. Tell them yes, Won Young said. Tell them if they execute flawlessly, this ends here. But also tell them we'll be monitoring Clayton's business practices going forward. Any hint of predatory lending, any whisper of another family being exploited, and we revisit this conversation with less generous terms. Park nodded and stepped out to make the call. Hyun-woo was staring at his boss with something like awe. You really did it. You took down a millionaire real estate mogul in less than 8 hours. I didn't take him down, Wan Yung said quietly. I made him pay a debt he owed. There's a difference. The next morning, Wan Yung sat alone in the back room of the restaurant, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise paint the city gold and crimson. His phone buzzed with updates. Clayton's lawyers had delivered all documents to Attorney Park's office. The title transfer was filed with the county. The check was cut and certified. The public statement was scheduled for a 10 a.m. press release. At 9:45, Danny burst through the door, laptop in hand. "Boss, you need to see this." He turned the screen around. It was a live feed of a press conference. Clayton Properties logo prominent in the background. Marcus Clayton standing at a podium, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "Ladies and gentlemen," Clayton read from prepared remarks, his voice flat and mechanical. "It has come to our attention that Clayton Properties made significant errors in processing a residential mortgage foreclosure. The Robertson family home was improperly seized due to administrative mistakes in our restructuring department. We take full responsibility for this error and hardship it caused." Wan Yung's crew gathered around the laptop, watching in silence. "Effective immediately," Clayton continued. "We are reversing the foreclosure and returning the property to Ms. Sarah Robertson with full clear title. Additionally, Clayton Properties will be implementing new oversight procedures to ensure this type of error never occurs again. We have also established a victim compensation fund for any families who believe they may have been similarly affected by processing errors." The assembled journalists erupted with questions, but Clayton didn't take any. He simply stepped away from the podium and disappeared through a side door, flanked by lawyers. "He looks like a man at his own funeral," Min-jae observed. "He should," Wan Yung said. "In a way, he is. The man who walked into that office yesterday, the one who thought himself untouchable, he's dead now. What's left is someone who knows exactly how fragile his empire really is." His phone buzzed again. A text from Attorney Park. "Robertson paperwork complete. She can move back in today. Check being delivered by courier." Wan Yung stood, draining his coffee. "Min-jae, get the car. We have one more stop to make." "The Robertson house?" Jae-sung asked. "No, not yet." Wan Yung pulled on his jacket, checking his reflection in the darkened window. The man who looked back was the same one who'd knelt on a sidewalk yesterday afternoon. Tattooed, dangerous, hardened by years of violence and calculated cruelty. But maybe, just maybe, there was something else there too. Something he'd thought lost when Ji-young died in that county hospital, asking for her rabbit. "I want to make sure everything is perfect first," he said. "Then we'll go see if that little girl still has her dog." The sedan arrived at the Robertson house just after sunset, that brief window when the world balanced between day and night, when shadows stretched long and everything seemed suspended in amber light. Wan Yung had sent his crew home. This wasn't business anymore, wasn't something that required witnesses or backup. This was personal in a way he couldn't quite articulate, even to himself. He'd made Min-jae drop him off 3 blocks away, preferring to walk the final stretch alone. The neighborhood looked different now than it had yesterday, though nothing physical had changed. Same manicured lawns, same quiet streets, same comfortable houses with their 2-car garages and basketball hoops. But yesterday this place had felt like a stage set for tragedy. Today it felt like what was supposed to be, a place where families lived ordinary lives, where children played and mothers came home tired from work but safe, secure. The Robertson house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, a modest 2-story with blue shutters and a small front porch. Wan Yung had made sure everything was handled, not just a legal transfer and the check, but the details that bureaucracy often overlooked. He'd had his people arrange for the power to be turned back on immediately, for a grocery delivery to be made that afternoon, for the few possessions that hadn't been sold off at auction to be returned. Clayton had balked at some of these demands, but Attorney Park had been very persuasive about the definition of complete restitution. Lights glowed in the windows now, warm, golden light that spoke electricity and safety in home. Wan Yung stood on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, watching. He could walk away now. His debt to universe, or to Ji-young's memory, or to whatever moral ledger, he kept in the darkest parts of his conscience, had been paid. He'd done what he set out to do. The little girl would keep her dog, the mother would have her home, and justice had been served in the only way Won-Young knew how to serve it. But he didn't walk away. Instead, he found himself moving up the front walk, his expensive shoes silent on the concrete, until he stood at the base of the porch steps. Through the window, he could see movement, shadows cast against curtains, the suggestion of people inside rebuilding their lives. The front door opened before he could decide whether to knock. Sarah Robertson stood in the doorway, and the transformation was startling. She still looked tired. Exhaustion like that didn't vanish in a day, but something fundamental had changed. She stood straighter. Her eyes, which had been hollow and defeated yesterday, now held a spark of life. She wore clean clothes, her hair was washed, and there was color in her cheeks that came from having eaten real food, perhaps for the first time in days. "I knew you'd come," she said softly. Won-Young said nothing, uncertain what response would be appropriate. He'd threatened men, negotiated with killers, commanded respect through fear and calculated violence. But facing this woman who he'd saved but barely knew, he found himself uncharacteristically silent. "Please," Sarah said, stepping back. "Come in." "I need to. We need to thank you." "That's not necessary." "I know it's not necessary. I'm doing it anyway." There was steel in her voice, the kind that came from working 60-hour weeks in healthcare, from raising a child alone, from surviving what should have broken her. Won-Young recognized strength when he saw it, and Sarah Robertson had more of it than Marcus Clayton would ever possess. He climbed the steps and entered the house. The interior was sparse. Most of their furniture had been sold or lost in foreclosure, but it was clean and warm and filled with the small signs of occupation that made a house a home. Children's drawings on a refrigerator, a jacket hung by the door, the lingering smell of something cooking, probably from the grocery delivery he'd arranged. "Maureen," Sarah called toward the stairs. "Come down here, baby. We have a visitor." The sound of small feet thundering downstairs, and then Maureen appeared at the bottom, wearing pajamas printed with stars and moons. Her braids had been redone, the beads clicking as she moved in her face. Her face was transformed by pure, uncomplicated joy. "Sir!" she exclaimed. And then she was running toward him, a golden blur of her running beside her. Sunshine, the puppy that had started all of this, bounded alongside Maureen with the enthusiastic clumsiness of young dogs everywhere. His tail wagged so hard his entire back end swayed, and he barked once, high-pitched and excited, as if he too recognized a man who'd save him from being sold. Maureen stopped just short of Won-Young, suddenly shy, remembering perhaps that this was the intimidating man with tattoos who'd knelt on the sidewalk. But Sunshine had no such reservations. The puppy jumped up, placing his paws on Won-Young's leg, trying desperately to reach high enough to lick his face. Won-Young knelt, the same motion he'd made yesterday on that sidewalk, and the puppy immediately took advantage, licking his face with single-minded devotion. Despite himself, despite everything he was and everything he'd done, Won-Young felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. "He remembers you," Maureen said, her voice filled with wonder. She knelt beside him, wrapping one arm around Sunshine's wiggling body. "Mama says you're the one who got our house back. Mama says you're like a hero from a story." "I'm not a hero," Won-Young said quietly, the words automatic. "You are to us," Sarah said from behind them. She'd moved to the kitchen doorway, leaning against the frame, watching the scene with eyes that shimmered with unshed tears. "I don't know how you did it," Attorney Park said. "He said a lot of things I didn't fully understand. Legal things. But the important part is we're home. We're safe. Because of you." Won-Young stood, and Sunshine sat at his feet, tail still wagging, looking up at him with the absolute trust and love that only dogs can give. Maureen stood too, and before Won-Young could react, she'd wrapped her small arms around his waist in a fierce hug. "Thank you," she whispered into his jacket. "Thank you for letting me keep Sunshine. Thank you for helping Mama. Thank you for everything." Won-Young stood frozen, his arms at his sides, uncertain what to do with this display of innocent gratitude. In his world, debts were paid with money or blood or fear, not with hugs from 7-year-old girls. not with the trust of puppies or the tears of grateful mothers. Slowly, carefully, as if handling something infinitely fragile, he placed one hand on top of Maureen's head, the gesture awkward but genuine. "Take care of him," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Take care of each other." Maureen looked up at him, her face solemn. "We will. I promise." Sarah approached, and for a moment Wan Yung thought she might hug him too, but she simply extended her hand. He took it, her grip surprisingly strong for someone who'd been so close to breaking. "I'll pay you back," she said firmly. "The money you gave Maureen, everything you spent fixing this, I'll pay back every dollar. It might take years, but I will." "No," Wan Yung said. "Yes, I don't accept charity. I pay my debts." He almost smiled at that. How many times had he said those exact words? How many times had he built his reputation on the principle that debts must always be paid? "Then pay it forward," he said finally. "When you see someone who needs help, someone powerless and desperate, help them. That's how you repay this debt." Sarah nodded slowly, understanding passed between them. Two people who'd survived in a world designed to crush them, who'd learned that strength sometimes meant knowing when to accept help and when to give it. Wan Yung moved toward the door, and Sunshine followed, whining softly, as if asking him to stay. Maureen picked up the puppy, holding him close. "Will we see you again?" she asked. Wan Yung paused at the threshold, looking back at the three of them, mother, daughter, and dog, framed in the warm light of their reclaimed home. In his world of darkness and violence, of territories marked in blood and alliances sealed with fear, they represented something he'd thought lost forever. Not innocence. The world had taken that from them too. But resilience. Hope. The stubborn refusal to be broken. "Maybe," he said, which was more honest than yes and kinder than no. He stepped out into the cooling evening air, pulling the door closed behind him. The street was quiet, peaceful, exactly as it should be. As he walked back toward where Min Jae would be waiting with the car, Wan Yung pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. There was work to do tomorrow, territory disputes to mediate, debts to collect, the endless machinery of his empire that never stopped turning. But tonight, for just a few hours, he could carry with him the image of a little girl holding her puppy, safe in her own home, smiling. It wasn't redemption. He'd done too much, hurt too many people, crossed too many lines for that. But it was something, a sliver of light in his dark world, as fragile and precious as a child's trust. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with messages. Min Jae asking for his location, Danny reporting on Clayton's compliance, Jae-sung confirming tomorrow's meetings. The world pulling him back into its familiar rhythms of violence and calculation. But for now, just for now, Wan Yung allowed himself to remember Ji-young's smile, to imagine that somewhere, somehow, she could see what he'd done today. That maybe, in some small way, he'd honored her memory by saving another little girl's joy. The sedan appeared at the end of the street, headlights cutting through the gathering darkness. Wan Yung climbed in, and Min Jae pulled away without asking questions, understanding that some moments required silence. Behind them, the lights in the Robertson house continued to glow, a beacon of ordinary happiness in an ordinary neighborhood. And in the back seat of a black sedan, carrying a Korean Mafia boss back to his kingdom of shadows, something that had been frozen for 15 years thawed just slightly, letting the smallest, most dangerous thing of all, hope. Take a breath with me. Subscribe, and let me know your location and current time down in the comments.